Hi everyone. In this video I'll show you how to make animated skyboxes with flow maps in Godot. We'll be using Godot 3.4.3 and Krita 5.0.2 to accomplish this. Alright, so let's get started. We'll need a skybox texture first. I'm gonna use Polyhaven for this. They have a lot of nice HDRs, and you can basically use any texture you want, but try and be sure that you find one that has some good clouds in it. I'm gonna use this one called Sunflowers. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna download a 4K version of the HDR file, which is the one I'm actually going to display. And then I'll download a 1K version of the EXR file, which I'll use to get started with painting the flow map. I need an EXR file because I need to open it in Krita and it doesn't open HDR files. And 1K is enough because the flow map doesn't need to be the full resolution of 4K. Yep, I have these two files ready here. Okay, so let's try and get started on painting the flow map. We'll start out by loading up the smaller version of the HDRi in Krita. You can see here it's also overexposed in here. It doesn't matter for what we'll be saving because we'll just be painting a new flow map on top of this. We're just referencing it. But it is a bit annoying because we can't actually see the exact sun position. And we want to avoid painting flows right where the sun is. You could just have a look in Godot and just see, okay, the sun is here, so it must be approximately here, and like make a little note of it in a layer or something. If you want to be precise, which I try to be, you can use the lot management here and change the white point, which is what I've done here, and then you can see exactly where the sun is and like make a little note of it. I'll include this color profile in the video description if you want to try and use that, but otherwise you can just try and sort of place it approximately. But yeah, I basically just need it just so I can make a little dot where the sun location is so I can reference it in a bit. So okay, so we'll need a brush to paint flows with. So what kind of brush do we need for that? We need a normal map brush, which I probably can't find right now. There it was. Here it is. So we'll make another new layer. And let's just try and paint. And what you'll see here is that what we're basically painting now is neutral normal direction. And that's because the brush is set to have its tangent, which is what decides which color it gets. It's getting that from the tilt of the pen. If you have a digitizer, I'm not going to use a digitizer for this right now. I'm just going to use my mouse. So instead I'll set it over to direction. So you can see now if I start painting, we will actually get flow maps. So that's what we want. We also want to adjust the Y to be minus Y instead of plus Y, and that's just because of the UV directions in Godot, I think. We will also just take the brush tip and we'll just set it to Gaussian instead and make it really soft like this, and just so it's a bit of a softer brush. So yeah, now we can paint flows as we want. One issue with this is that the direction changes can be a bit abrupt, which make the flow maps not look so good. So I'll just enable the stabilizer on the tool options on the brush, and that just means it doesn't start moving until you've moved it a bit in one direction. So that just makes the flows much softer looking. Now we just have to decide where the flows are going. So if we just look a little bit in here, I feel like it looks like the wind is going sideways here, and maybe like appearing or disappearing here, and going sideways over here. So yeah, so that's what I'll try and aim for that. So let's have a look in here. So if I wanted to go sideways here, let's say we decide that the wind appears from here. So I'll draw a flow going up. And then we want the flows to go in the opposite direction 180 degrees away, and that's approximately over here, like half the length along the HDRi. And now we basically just have to connect these two flows. They'll be, the wind will sort of be going sideways here, and then we just need to fill out these flows in this like rounded shape, because that's how the HDRi ends up getting mapped. You can see that, right? This is a straight road, and you can see how that also ends up being curved. It's just because of the sort of spherical way the HDRi gets mapped. So this does not have to be all that precise. We just have to sort of fill in some approximate flows. So I could skip through this, but I figure some people might be interested to see that it actually doesn't take all that long to make something that looks okay. Of course, if this was for a production game, you might want to make these more precise, but this will be fine for an example. But just think about the directions you're moving the brush in, that you want to try and create these curves. So that's 1/2. We'll just enable wrapping with Shift W to go into this wrap mode, and then we can just create the other ones. So we'll just go the other way here. Actually, we should probably almost go sideways right down here, close to the horizon, right? And then we just curl, and we just need to be sure to remember to switch direction if you're doing it in one side or doing it in the other side. But yeah, it should be pretty clear to see if you accidentally, oh, I accidentally go the other way, then it has the completely wrong color, right? So just keep at it until it's all filled in here. Oh, see, now I went the wrong way. And yeah, you can see I'm going a little bit out of bounds up into the top of the texture, but that does not matter, because we can just delete that. We can just fix that in a minute. Okay, let me just correct these flows downwards a little bit here. They ended up being a little bit too much sideways. Okay, so this is very quick. This is very approximate. So if you wanted these to look really fancy, you could keep going with a smaller and smaller brush, or you could also maybe use a little bit of blurring, just set for a bit of a lower opacity. We can disable the stabilization for this, and then you could just, just sort of even out any parts that were a bit too extreme in their transitions, and just go for it. Oh, that was probably not good that we went there. Okay. But yeah, as I mentioned, like, it's not super important that these are very precise. It's more just about having a general direction for them. Okay, so now we need to clean this up. So we don't want there to be any flows down at the ground. And we also sort of want to fade in nicely. So let's try and accomplish that. Let's start by adding another layer here underneath the flows, and we'll just go and pick a value that's half red, half green, no blue. That's the neutral flow map layer, which means no flow. So we'll fill that in with a Shift backspace, and we can just go back up to the flow layer and just box select down here on the bottom and delete that part where we don't want any flows. Okay, and then we want to fade out a bit. So I'll just set the transparency to, we can actually just hide that layer. Let's set the transparency to be a bit lower on the flows, and we will add a transparency mask. so we can easily adjust the transparency without messing with the nice flows we painted. So I'll use the gradient tool here. Just set it to black to white, and if we then do like this, then we are making a black and white mask there, so we're fading out close to the horizon. And what we actually want to do the same up in the top, because the flows don't really make much sense up at the pole. So we'll basically just fade them out to nothing up there. It might work better with this one, which goes like this gradient goes black to nothing. So I think we can use that up here like this. And if we make this appear again, you can see we're just fading them out up there. Okay, so that looks good. One thing we might just want to do is we might just want to add a second transparency mask, and we'll just we can just use this one to just paint out the trees a little bit, just because otherwise, in my experience, you get a bit of the trees moving along, which might just look a bit strange. So if we just use this, we'll just set it to black, and then we can just paint out the trees. Actually, maybe we want to use a little bit of a softer brush for that. But yeah, we'll just quickly just paint along here. It does not need to be perfect, but just the worst of these trees here, just so they're not moving too much with the rest of the clouds. And finally, we can just remember our little sun position here, and we can just use that same transparency mask and just do like this. And if we make this appear again, hide the sun, maybe we need to do it one more time. Yeah, and that's basically just right where the sun is. There won't be much flow. There won't be much flow up at the pole, and there'll be a bit of a gradation from the horizon line. So this flow map should look pretty good. Let's give it a go. Okay, so let's try and export this file over into Godot. So we go into our project, and we'll call this flow map. And we'll just save it as a PNG. We don't need any fancy EXR for this. Yeah, and we don't need any transparency, and we are not going to force convert it to sRGB because we want to keep it in linear values. And we have it here. Okay, then to generate our new animated skybox, we will need a viewport. So let's add a viewport, and we need to set its resolution to the resolution of the full HDRi. I think that's 4K by 2K. We need to leave HDR on because the HDRi is in high dynamic range. We want to keep that, and we need to say keep 3D linear. And we need to set the usage to 3D. We can use 3D without effects because we're not using those buffers, but you need to use 3D to have HDR still. We need to set the render target to flip, otherwise it'll be mirrored. And we need to set the update mode to always, so it's constantly going to generate a new version of the texture for us. And then we will just need something to actually display the effect on, like some kind of a canvas. We'll use a color rect. We can call that canvas. and we'll just need to set its size to that resolution as well. Okay, and then let's get started on the shader. So we'll go under the material section of our color rig, and we'll say we want a new shader material, and under the shader a new shader. So we'll set the shader type to be a canvas item, since this is a 2D texture, and we'll need a fragment function to do our operations in. So what we'll need is some uniforms to read in our textures. So we'll say uniform sampler 2D sky texture, and uniform sampler 2D flow texture. Okay, and what we need to do is we can start out with assigning them in. So now we should get some shader parameters, and we have a sky texture. Ooh, guess that looked a bit funny. Okay, and like that, they're loaded in here. And what we just want to do is we want to read those in. Let's start out by reading in the flow, and we'll read the flow into a vector 2 called flows. And we only need the red-green channels, because that's the whole point, right? It's flow maps. They're just 2D vectors. But we want to unpack them, because at the moment they're in 0 to 1 space, and we want them in -1 to 1 space. So we will multiply the values by 2 and subtract 1. And what we want to use these flows for is to offset the UVs when we read in the sky texture. So if we do a vec for sky, we read in the texture of the sky texture, then we are gonna read in the UV plus the flows, and we will just take the color and we'll set it equal to the sky. Now what I'll actually just do is I'll just save the shader here, just so it's a bit easier to edit it while selecting other parts of the scene rather than having to go into the canvas every time. So if we then go back up into the world environment here, it's currently just set directly to the texture, but instead we want to set it to a viewport texture. You can see we can't do that because the resource isn't local. It's standard, so we just have to choose the sky resource here and say it's local, and then we can say new viewport texture, and then we can select our viewport, and there you can see we now have a beautiful flow map. So that's obviously not what we want, but you can actually see it is getting distorted. It just looks a bit wrong at the moment. Okay, so obviously there's a couple of issues. One thing, the flow is obviously way too strong. Secondly, it's not moving, so let's fix that now. So we'll open up our shader. I sort of know from experience that these flows are way too strong, so I'll just start out by just multiplying by 0.1. That looks a bit more reasonable, but it's still a lot of distortion. I'll make another uniform, if I can spell, float, and we'll just call that strength, and we'll also use 0.1 just for now. And we'll multiply it by that. So now it's very little. It is actually still distorting, just not as much. But obviously we want it to animate instead. So how do we do that? We obviously need to take time into account. So we'll create a timer. And that timer we will assign the fract of time. So this will just become a timer that constantly goes from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. If we try to multiply with that one as well, you see we have some movement happening, and that actually looks pretty nice, but of course it snaps back, which is not great. So how do we go about fixing that? Okay, so first of all, let's actually add a second control for speed here. So we'll just say speed, and we'll call that 0.4. And we'll basically just create our own version of time that we'll use instead, so we have some more control here. And that'll just be time multiplied by speed. And we'll just use that when we're doing this. So yeah, now we have a uniform for the strength, we have a uniform for the speed. Okay, but still we have our big skip every time the timer runs out. We want to fix that. So how do we fix that? I've made a little diagram here. So basically this is our first timer here, right? So it constantly goes from 0 to 1 and then back down and back down, and we want to hide all these skips. And the way we can do that is by doing the whole thing twice instead, offset by each other. So the red line here will be a second version of the skybox that we also distort, but we offset the time of it by half a unit. So then we have two of them. But how do we then use these two? We mix between them back and forth with this zigzagging motion. So whenever the skip is there, that version of the sky texture is not being shown, and then it fades in between the two, and it's being shown in the middle of its progress, and then it fades out, and opposite with the other sky texture. Okay, so that probably sounds more complicated than it is. Let's give it a go here. Okay, so let's rename timer to timer 1, sky to sky 1, and that, and assign that. So everything should work the same, but we'll just create a second timer. We'll call that timer 2, and we will just offset that by 0.5. And then we can create a second texture fetch where we are using timer 2 as our offset. Now if we change between these two, it'll probably be very, very different to see the skip because it just changes, but what we can try and do here is we can mix them, sky 1 and sky 2, and we can just mix them by 0.5, so we're seeing both at the same time. So then you can see we have both of them, and they're skipping back and forth. So now instead of just mixing half and half between them, we need to mix back and forth with our sawtooth motion that I showed before. There's might be easier ways to do it, but this is how I do it. So we'll make a mix timer, and we will take the minimum between fract time and 1 minus fract time. Okay, I can't spell. Okay, so that's basically, we have a line that's constantly going up, and then we make the inverse, a line that's constantly going down. If we take the minimum of those two, we get a little sawtooth, but it only goes up to 0.5. So we'll multiply the whole thing with 2.0 to make it go all the way between 0 and 1. So if we try to use this mix timer instead, see if that works. No, and that might be because the values are reversed, so it might actually be doing the skipping or the mixing the opposite way. Yep, and that's it. So now we have exactly what we want here. So suddenly this looks much better. Like there's still some issues, and we'll solve those in a second, but it's getting somewhere. The problem we have at this point is that it's sort of pretty clear that you're fading back and forth between two textures, and this is a common issue with flow maps. So there's also a common way to fix this, and that is by adding some noise to your time that you're driving your flow maps with, because that ends up offsetting the entire fade back and forth. So let's just give that a go and see how that works. So we'll create another uniform sampler 2D noise texture. And for the noise texture, you don't really need anything special. You just need like some low frequency noise. So we'll just use the simplex noise from that comes built into Godot. So if we go over into the canvas and noise texture, we will just assign a new noise texture. 512 is fine. We need it to be seamless, and then new open simplex noise. We'll set it to only have 1 octave and a period of 32, and that's there, and that looks fine for me. So if we go back here, open up the shader, and then we'll read in the noise into a float. Okay. And we only want 1 value. So if we just add this into our speed here. Yeah, and I don't know how clear it is in the video, but this actually makes it look much nicer, because now this fade back and forth is offset across the texture instead now. So now we're really getting somewhere. Basically the shader is done and it's looking pretty good, but there are a few little fixes we can think about. Like one of them is that we have a texture seam here, and that's basically just because we have to be sure that we enable repeat on both the flow map and on the HDRi. Hopefully that'll clear it. Yeah, and now we don't have that seam anymore. One thing you can also think about doing is that you might see that the flow maps are moving pretty quick down here compared to here, and that has a lot to do with the texel density or the pixel density on the texture. So you could think about editing the flow map and like fading it out, the strength of it, like adding more transparency to the flow layer down here. I've done that in some of them and just can adjust it a little bit. Okay, so now there's basically just one last thing to do for this to work in a final game, and that is to correctly set the texture in here, because what you'll see happen now if we were to save this scene, close it and open it again, there is no environment. We'd need to clear this and do a new viewport texture and assign it. Then it's up and running again. So why is that? That's because when that function gets run, when it gets assigned, MIP maps are generated that are needed for it to correctly use the HDRi as an environment, and like it needs to do that for a viewport, but it won't like run that operation just because it's assigned in here. So you sort of need to manually run that operation. So we'll just create a little script that does that for us. We'll just call it set panorama, and we will just need we'll need to have the viewpoint in here instead. So we can assign it from in here, and we'll say and we'll use the enter tree function because that can also run in the editor mode rather than just in the running game, because it would be nice if we could see this in the editor as well if we didn't need to fix it every time. So we just need to run environment dot background sky dot set panorama sky texture. Okay, so this should work. This should run as soon as this gets added into the node tree. Unfortunately, I found that there's a bit of an issue with that you sort of need to wait a few or like half a second before you do this assign. So I'll just do a timer to wait a little bit before we do it. So this line of code will just wait 300 milliseconds before we do the assign. And we would like this code to also run in I'm sleeping here, in tool mode, so it also runs in the editor, right? Not only in the running game. So if we save this, and we just need to set the viewport texture in here instead. Okay, let's save, and if we close down again and we run it, yeah, you could see it sort of took a little bit of time, and then it assigned the texture for us, and then it works. So yeah, that's just a little hint. There might be a more elegant way to do that. Maybe you can listen to a signal that gets sent and then it's ready to assign it, but this at least worked. So yeah, that's the whole thing done for you. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video and would like to support me in making more videos and in my open source projects like my Godot add-ons, consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks to my patrons, Sagik Yiragerne, Attila, David Masiaka, Andres Hernandez, Sneaky AMX, Mike King, Decaying Dev, Alex Litinsky, Elias Eskelinen, Joseph Catrambone, Oscar Johnson, Winston, Space J0, and Marcus Richter. Have a good one, everyone.